Свети соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Взвейтесь соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Там бел город полотняный, морем улицы шумят, под золотою румяной медные маковки горят. Там едва заря настанет, строй пехотный закипит, барабанов не погрянет и штыками заблестит. Там едва заря настанет, строй пехотный закипит, барабанов не погрянет и штыками заблестит. Закипит тогда войною богатырская игра. Строй на строй пойдет стеною и прокатится ура. Светить соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Взвейтесь соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Светить соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Взвейтесь соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Там бел город полотняный, морем улицы шумят, под золотою румяной медные маковки горят. Там едва заря настанет, строй пехотный закипит, барабанов не погрянет и штыками заблестит. Там едва заря настанет, строй пехотный закипит, барабанов не погрянет и штыками заблестит. Закипит тогда войною богатырская игра. Строй на строй пойдет стеною и прокатится ура. Светить соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело под шатрами, поле лагерем стоять. Светить соколы орлами, полно горе горевать. То ли дело
Welcome to volume 1.2 of solo drills in the grappler's toolbox entitled Joint Articulation and Strength. The goal of biomechanical efficiency is to use the least amount of overall effort to accomplish the most significant gains. So, the purpose of the exercises in this particular volume are to aid you in the recruitment and coordination of your comprehensive potential through unique motoric programming in the Ross training system. As we mentioned before, the most critical aspect of biomechanical activity is going to be your respiration. So go and get yourself a copy of the breathing tape. I'm going to be zooming right through the respiratory aspect of this, though tying it into the biomechanical exercises. What we're going to begin with are shoulder breathers. Now, these are basic shoulder circles, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tying these into respiration and looseness. The suppleness in your shoulders coordinated with your respiration. So if you remember from the breathing tape, intra-abdominal pressure, clenching, shoulders, stay loose, don't make these tense. If you tense up and hold your breath, you're going to pass out. You're going to become Valsalva susceptible. So when you're going through, start to alternate your wrists across each other. Each time. Now this is going to aid you again if you already have a copy of shock absorption and the ability to absorb blows. Because as you take this exercise, this is going to acclimate your body towards looseness upon impact. Take the exercise in the opposite direction. Once again, from the shoulders. This time, as your shoulders roll back, allow the inhalation to occur. This is an excellent exercise to warm you up in joints and in respiration coordinated together. Take the exercise now, the shoulder breather, and start to expand your arms. Go back into the exhalation. Not just ballistically swinging the shoulders. That's going to cause micro trauma to the joints if you're just isolating the joint. The whole body has to be coordinated together. You can see that it starts to rock from your pelvis. Let the shoulder gain momentum through the rest of your movement. Take this individual motion. What I want you to do is work on dropping your shoulder down like we just did. But I want you to bring it to your chin. Now look at the frame of reference here. Your head is going to keep the same frame, but your shoulder is going to come underneath and roll over. Come underneath and roll over. This is going to be critical for later on in the more complex motor sets. Underneath and alternate. So your performance goal is to bring your shoulder to your chin, underneath, each time. Notice that it's not the torso that's moving, but just the shoulder. Being able to recruit a comprehensive joint plan is what's going to lend you the power and fluidity that keeps your game smooth. Take this just a little bit further. What I want you to do is extend your arms. This is one of the most difficult exercises initially because of the suppleness that's demanded from using one particular vector to control the range of motion. You need to work on one joint. And we've all seen shoulder lifts and shoulder circles, but the ability to coordinate that, to let the tone loose. If you're clenched, your movement declines. So the suppleness that's lent from a range of motion exercise, up and out. And the same thing in the opposite direction. Let your shoulders roll over as they travel out. It's not sufficient to just lift the torso. And some of us who have spent too much time in the gym can't hardly even move. Biomechanical efficiency demands that you regain the suppleness in your shoulders so that you can coordinate the rest of your motion together. What we're required to do now is to coordinate our neck, this complex, along with our shoulder movement. So we're going to begin with proper alignment. Many of us have a transposed neck. This is going to decrease our mobility and increase the target of our head. We need to regain this mobility, so what we need, a particular drill that we can work on is bringing the head back on top of the spine. To do this, the chin comes in, the top of the head is here, not here. If you see, this line goes down through my throat. This is the top of my head. Chin comes in, so as the neck is transposed forward, up, realignment. Forward, realignment. Working on this exercise is going to give you the ability to rest your head and balance it appropriately. If your head is transposed forward, it's going to cause excess tone in your musculature and your shoulders to keep this in place, which is going to decrease your mobility and increase you as a stationary target. You need to bring your head back on top, keep your chin in, back and forth. Next exercise is going to be a bit difficult, so I want you to concentrate on the performance goal of your mandibular angle, this corner of your jaw. I want you to concentrate on that being the drawing point to move from one side to the next, one side to the next. See how the plane stays even. Don't tilt your head. Move from the mandible. Some of you are going to have some difficulty at first, and you'll end up twisting your head off plane. Keep it in plane and move along this individual line coming out from your mandible. Back and forth. This looseness in your neck is going to be requisite as we start to coordinate these two exercises. Realignment front and back, and realignment laterally. To the side, to the front. To the side now. Let your neck come back to this original front position. To the side and front. We're going to continue that all the way to the other side. And back. And back. Notice that the shoulders are automatically starting to recruit into the motion. So what I want you to do is I want you to add that into this motion. Allow the shoulders to already come into the motion, back and forth. See how the head begins to bob along the plane of the shoulder. I want you to work on coordinating that motion. Remember from the shoulder breather, how the shoulder comes over. This is going to be creating a different plane, so I want you to work on coordinating this circulature and your shoulder articulation from one to the next. When we go on next, what we're going to do is we're going to drop down from the trunk into the elbow and see how we can start to recruit the rest of this appendage into our motion when we're working on this suppleness. Let us add into this recruitment one more joint, beginning with the elbow. We'll start on this lateral plane. Look here how your fist has to open up in order for the full range of motion to occur. Right from here. Keep this loose but not flaccid. You don't want your arm to fly. You want this to be coordinated You want this articulation to recruit the shoulders that we've been working on before. So when you're working through this exercise, start with one, but make it shoulder driven to carry you through the motion. Shoulder driven. When you add in two, you can start with making the circles asymmetrical. Begin this way because it might be easier, working both directions. You notice that once again, like we worked with the shoulder breathers, the hips already start to help in the recruitment of power. Once you're comfortable, start to make this locomotion originating from the shoulder, but carried through to the elbows in asymmetrical circles, back and forth. Once you're comfortable with the motion, then let it carry where your shoulders are starting to drive the motion and the arm is carrying through of its own accord, rather than thinking with your hand. This isolated motion doesn't coordinate the rest of your activity. If you work something in isolation, it functions in isolation. To coordinate your activity requires coordinated exercise. So, back and forth, both directions. From this plane, this is going to be a little difficult because this image will be compressed. But I want you to see that from this plane, we're doing the same motion from here, but now on a frontal plane. I want you to add in your shoulder motion to this elbow drive here. Some of you will already recognize this exercise. You don't need the benefit of a speed bag if you're coordinating your motion. The speed bag provides biofeedback. Your ability to coordinate your motion will short circuit that need. You'll be able to work on coordinating your activity if it's shoulder driven, if the locomotion begins with the shoulder. Work these both directions. One benefit that you can't use from the speed bag, but you can do in a solo drill, the ability to move at non-standard directions in non-standard fashions depends upon your coordination. That gives you the ability to respond to any stimulus that's present, because you'll be able to launch from a motoric program, from an overall movement, instead of a particular set. You'll be able to sew together your techniques because it's based upon an overall movement program. Let's drop down one more joint. We're not going to focus on this joint just right now, but what I want you to do is work on this particular exercise. Many of us have seen these particular wrist drills where you're rolling on the wrist. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. This is an isolation drill. To coordinate and recruit the joint, you have to move the joint. Notice this is more than moving the hand. It's moving around the node of the joint. This is going to be integral to aligning your skeleton when you're depositing force. If this is fixated, look how it recruits the muscles. You're going to limit your motion. If the mobility is supple, when you're working this particular drill, notice how you can coordinate one particular joint to program and recruit it with the rest. Your ability to keep this supple while tone is going to be an important component of your upper body regimen. Take that, and we're going to add that drill onto our torso. Now, we've concentrated on the neck, the shoulders, the elbows, and now the wrists. We need to program that, and we're already starting to recruit it into the rest of our spine. We're going to start with a drill of moving laterally with keeping the hips stationary. Moving laterally. This is taking your upper spine and adjusting it over a half plane. Notice that, not bending over, along this particular plane, rise up, alignment, and drop over. Back and forth. You know the old maxim, miss by an inch, miss by a mile. The ability to recruit just this evasive activity because of your overall coordination could mean the difference between safety and a knockout. safety and receiving impact. Your ability to have an overall movement program is integral. So we're going to recruit the rest of our spine when we're working on this activity. Let's add in the shoulders. We're going to drop back, but now we're going to start shifting back and forth. Shoulders are rolling as the spine is adjusting. Back and forth. See how the neck is already starting to recruit into the activity. When you take these particular movement programs, you're going to see that it's in this fashion that you can coordinate your overall activity. These aren't just activities to be done for their own sake. They're to be done to bring in your whole comprehensive potential, like we said at the beginning of the tape, comprehensive potential. So take this exercise, work back and forth. You're going to feel the respiration start to change as the intra-lung pressure starts to shift from one to the next. So keep your passage open. If you hold your breath, you're going to pass out. Keep your breath. Back and forth. Allow your neck to start to come into the motion, and you'll see that wherever your arms carry is dependent upon your trunk mobility. Sometimes our performance is not just hampered by immobility, but by social pressure. The next exercise is going to be as much of a social challenge as it is a physical one, and that deals with the mobility in the pelvis. Regardless of what style or what game you're in, the root, the trunk, the power generates from the pelvis. If you can't move your pelvis, you're recruiting your back muscles. How many times have we heard of people injuring their back muscles because they're not properly aligning and distributing the force from their legs? So in the next exercise, free your mind a bit and work on the mobility of your pelvis. We're going to start with a lock on your glutes. Lock in as you tilt your pelvis up. Now, I could give you a visual on this if you have to go very badly. Then you're going to get the correct posture. Bring this together as tight as possible as you tilt this up. Your shoulders are automatically going to drop down as your pelvis is lifting up towards your shoulder girdle. The opposite of this motion is going to be relaxation, proper alignment from the top of your head being pulled along the line. Articulate backwards, allow the coccyx to carry open, and allow the lower back to curve. You see the shoulders start to drop back, but this is a particularly unique motion to the pelvis. It's not bending over. It's the femoral joint. The ability to articulate from the pelvis. You'll notice that this power generation is going to be integral for any type of lift or transfer of force. So from this tilt to the lock, this tilt to the lock, it's already starting to recruit into the legs. So allow this tilt so that you recover the full mobility in your pelvis. When I say a social pressure, it's not a very fighting movement to make. Well, disregard any type of preconception about your potential so that you can reclaim the full amount of activity, so that you can have your full potential accessible. Next motion is going to be from your pelvis along this plane, just like we worked along the mandible. Tilt downward. The pelvis tilts downward to allow one to travel upward. This is going to free the mobility of one of the opposite leg. So you're going to work from one tilt to the next. This is not sufficient. This is a torso motion. Transferring your weight is not sufficient. It has to be a pelvic rock from one side to the next. One side to the next. So we're going to add these motions together. From the frontal tilt to the lateral tilt to behind to the opposite, so that we're working in one range of motion for the pelvis. Your footwork is not determined on the dexterity of your feet, but on the mobility of your pelvis. If you can't free this motion, you're not going to be able to move your feet. You'll be able to move them like a robot, charging your locomotive, your large muscles, to do all of the work, instead of recruiting your entire musculature so that you can actually program and move with the most amount of biomechanical efficiency. Remember, the least amount of effort to accomplish the most significant results. So, we have this circle here. Let's take just one pelvis, one side of our pelvis, and we're working one circle over top of the balance of our foot. Switch to the opposite side, and you're already seeing how this is starting to recruit into the knee, into the knee. If you keep loose, it's going to carry down to your ankle and to your toes. We're going to cover that in just a minute. Now that we're beginning to touch upon more of the pelvic mobility, we're able to recruit into it this lower appendage. So we're going to begin with the rotation on this femoral joint. Notice that this circle, you have to allow your spine to articulate as well as your pelvis to move. Don't kick or move, carry through a range of motion. Your job here is to expand the range of motion while keeping your respiration free. Don't think of this as stretching out. Think of this as recapturing a range of motion based upon your pelvic mobility. We're going to add something into this. Bring your leg up and let your knee free as you carry through here. Don't think of this as driving from the foot. Let your balance be based on your bottom leg so that this circle from the knee is loose. I don't want you to think of trying to drive from the foot, but nice and loose, back and forth. Notice that the circle is allowing the foot to carry through whatever range of motion it needs to. Now we're going to add this onto the circle that we've just done. You can keep this at whatever speed that you need to so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the range of motion exercise. The same thing is true when you're coming in the opposite direction. Bring through the pelvic articulation so that the whole range of motion is included and recruitment is coordinated. Now, down to the ankle. When you work on these are probably going to be more challenging than the rest, especially depending upon the technology on your feet. If you're barefoot, it's going to be easier, but if you have non-resistant substance, it's going to allow the range of motion to travel. So take those thick, bulky wrestling shoes off or those tennis sneakers so that you don't rip apart your ankle and work on the range of motion. Now, the first is let your knee tip in, curl your toes underneath, and roll onto your laces. From here, let your heel travel down and back around so that your toes pop back out. So around, as you're pressing your toes into the ground, one direction. Work this in both feet, in both directions. Outside toes, inside heel. Outside toes, inside heel. Now, curl the toes underneath. Now that we're working from one side of the appendage to the other, what I want to do is go back and work on particularly unique joint strength exercises. Joint circles are not sufficient for overall coordination because the range of motion on more than one joint is not merely a circle, but a circle added to a circle, or a figure eight. We're going to start with the root that we began initially. I want you to extend your arms outward, and if you need a visualization, tether your arms like you're on a rack. Tether your arms so that you don't change your plane to semaphore, like you're flagging down a plane. Keep your arms tethered to the wall, and I want you to bring one shoulder up and roll it over. You can't hold your breath to do this. If you do, you'll limit the range of motion. So tether, roll over, allow the deltoid to pass over the plane of your solar plexus. Roll it back, expand out from the solar plexus, and bring the other screw. Same thing, up, and over, tethered to the far wall, and back. One should be from here. Now look at the vector of force comes along the humerus bone. Same thing, roll, other side, roll, other side. You're starting to recruit into this, the articulation of your spine. So add in your respiration. This should be tied along one plane. So it's forcing the range of motion to increase at such a tight angle. At such a tight angle. When we come back to this, when we're screwing our arms, come back to here, and I want you to work just on this exercise, and I'm going to point out something. You're working on this. Now look down at your hands. Your hands have already begun in tracing the figure 8. If you looked at them, you probably stopped and had to start over because now the coordination is lost. It's not generating from the root. So come back to rolling the shoulders. If you're having a visualization problem, start with a circle in the front, counterclockwise, and a circle in the back, clockwise. When you bring these together, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, now you have a path upon which your arm can travel while you move from the root. If you work on this exercise and let your other hand just hang limp, because of the sympathetic nature of movement, it'll start to form the opposite motion. Coupling of forces from here. Working this back and forth. Now, the figure 8 motion is everywhere. I'm only going to be showing this in a few different planes because I want you to explore this. I don't want it to become dogmatic. Your movement is going to be different than your partner's, is going to be different than mine. Explore, don't regurgitate. Come through this motion, change the frame so that now you're drawing upward. Add into it your neck mobility. At a later date, we'll discuss more complex movement patterns like the waves so that you're generating motion outward along an almost parallel figure 8. But not for now. What I want you to do is concentrate now upon this gross motor motion so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the activity. Let your torso, your respiration, your neck, and your shoulders start to carry through the motion so that you're developing an overall motoric plan, a program upon which you can launch a particular technique, no matter what your particular game, whether it's to move in, to pummel around, to dispatch one threat, only to address your own, okay? You need to work on an overall plan. Let's turn this and move it backwards. If we were moving here, now you're rolling your shoulders over. If you're rolling your shoulders over, you're going to start to see that we're doing a different figure 8. To get a good visualization on this, I want you to turn and draw the opposite figure 8. We'll do this in the air to begin with. Start with, on the bottom, a circle, clockwise. On the top, counterclockwise. And move through counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Let your other arm limp. It's already going to start to carry into the motion. Opposite and equal directions. If you concentrate on moving your hands, you're going to start to get uncoordinated. Uncoordinated is a matter of isolation. Coordination is recruiting more and more joints into the motion. And it's not just in isolation. You'll start to lose the coordinated movement. Stay loose when you're working through here so that as this motion is recruited, it's called back into your motion. You'll see where this particular asymmetrical coupling of figure 8s is going to start to move your entire body so that power generation is based upon whatever particular position you're in, so that your whole movement is coordinated together. These figure eights are going to be critical into sewing together your particular techniques no matter what your game. Let's take this same motor program and apply it to our lower appendages. If we had this circle with the femoral joint and the knee coordinated with the ankle, if we add two circles together, we have this particular circle. Let's start with counterclockwise in front of us. Move and place a clockwise motion behind us. Counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. In order to carry through this complex range of motion so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the motion, you're going to need to stay buoyant. This particular exercise is going to fatigue your feet quite quickly. We're not used to grabbing onto the ground for balance. We're used to stepping across it very lightly. We need to root ourselves in, so that requires taking the joints and rotating them. We'll talk about this in another tape when we're starting to do rooting activities of tendons and ligaments wrapping around the skeletal structure so that we're rooted into position. For now, take your foot out in front of you at a 45-degree angle, transfer your weight on top of it, and come back to this figure eight. You'll notice that the pelvis is buoyant. The knee and the ankle and even the toes are recruited into the motion. So we're in front. Go back to the basics. Go back to this front circle of coming counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Now, in a later series when we talk about leg fencing, the ability to move and coordinate your pelvis with your leg motion, it's going to be critical that we work now on this particular movement program. The more coordinated that you become, the stronger your tendons are going to become, and the easier it will be to facilitate your movement into one technique to another. You can base upon your particular tactics on an overall movement strategy. Take this figure eight and turn it around. We're going to move now for a clockwise circle in front, and behind us, a counterclockwise circle. So now, as you carry through, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Notice how the articulation turns in your position to open up your pelvis. You need to explore this. It is nearly impossible to talk about every little nuance in a joint complex, such as an appendage. You need to explore this exercise thoroughly so that you're rotating into the ground, screwing, pulling, and drawing your balance based upon an overall movement scheme. This is going to give you the lightning quick reflexes you need because you're not coming up here to access a particular skill. It's based upon an overall movement program upon which the platform of your techniques are launched. So, figure eight forward, figure eight backward, switching, and take that. Now, I'm going to drop down a level. I want you to use both legs. If you can do both legs while standing, then call me because we're going to make a tape on levitation. But now that you're on the ground, I want you to work on coordinating these two figure eights together. You can see the relevance that we've already had from the first volume when we worked on switching shin boxes and leg threading. But here, this ability to coordinate two asymmetrical figure eights is going to give you a fending quality that you haven't had before because it's based on an overall movement set. When we go on, we're going to take this and go one step further and intensify the tensile strength of each particular joint. As I promised, we are going to work on particular tensile strength exercises for your wrist. Now, obviously, this is going to irradiate and start to recruit the rest of your joints into the motion. But you're going to initially feel this most excruciatingly wonderful in your wrists. Okay? I need you to go slowly, slow when you're working through this exercise, all of them. And I need you to go incremental. Do one or two, test them out. Do not put weight on your back. Do not blast through the exercises. Don't do it on concrete initially. And don't do it with friends cheering you on. Work on the developmental increase of the tensile strength of the tissues in your joints. All right. Now, some of you remember, if you've forgotten, you better go back, to work on the particular press-up of rotating from the first volume. Okay? We're going to make this a little more challenging. We're going to be going completely lateral, working from one side to the next. When you work on this, you're going to have to recruit your shoulder or you'll never be able to press up. You can't press up on bicep strength. You need to weight transfer and recruit your shoulder into the motion. Fair enough. Go and work on this, then we'll come back to another exercise. This one being the top of your hand as if you're holding a knife. Place this down onto the mat. Roll down onto your fist and then roll back. This is going to be the exercise. Start with here, because what we're going to add on to it is your own body weight. Back and forth. From here. Back and forth. Now, what I want you to do is take a breather before you try out this next exercise. If not, come back to this tomorrow. Turn off the tape now because this is going to be tough. I want you to work on pressing up to your wrists and then pressing up to your fists. When you do this coordinated, it's going to take a great deal of effort to keep your wrist tensile strong, keeping this brace. So what we're going to work on are particular specific exercises. Some of you may or may have not seen these. This particular, I want you to take the ridge of your hand, and place this out parallel, and arch your back into this. If you're feeling adventurous, start to press up, but go slowly. Go slowly. You'll tear this very easily if you don't work on the development of the attribute in your wrist. This should be pretty thorough by now. Come to your wrist from here. Bring this aligned with your forearm. You've been working on the lateral, but now this press is with the wrist already collapsed. From here. This is going to be a little challenging. Take this and switch it now. I promise, I will be torturing you later, but for now, torture yourself here. Forward and roll. Roll by pressing your elbows out. If you want to release some of the residual tension, come right to this exercise. If not, wait until the next day. Arch and extend your elbows. Bend and arch. Bend and arch. One of my favorites, if you watch recent Disney cartoons, is a monkey knuckle. Take these three, two leading, this will be the surface on the ground, and your thumb, and place this on the ground to get a purchase. Then you're going to press up, back and forth. We already said from here. I want you to take now, this is probably going to be one of the most critical. Notice that you're not locking your fingers out and pressing from here, but each joint has to be clawed in so that you're working on the particular tensile strength of each joint, each phalange. Work here, starting here first. When we're going to go on in just a moment, we're going to do the same routine with the ankles. Common sense disclaimer. If something is severely uncomfortable, stop. When we go on to the next exercise, I need you to focus upon what physiological events are occurring within your body. Don't try to accomplish an exercise. You cannot win at building the strength in your tissue. You can only develop. If you try and fight through this exercise, I guarantee you an injury. So don't fight through the exercise. Go to your current range of motion, go just a bit beyond, and relax and come off of it. When we work on the ankles, I see so many ankle injuries, it's not worth discussing. You need to work on the tensile strength of your ankles in all range of motions. We're going to begin with turning the foot, splaying it inside. Turn the sole of your foot towards the outside wall. Rest, bend your knee, rest your weight on top of it. Start transferring your weight so that you're on the foot sword, and bring the other into the same position. Once you're comfortable here, which might take a few weeks, I want you to step along a straight line, keeping your knees bent, backwards and forwards, so that you're working on developing the strength in a range of motion. How many times have we seen this motion? Because of the flaccid value of the tissues in the ankle. You need to be developing the tensile strength in the tendons now, so that when you do overtread this ankle, it's only leading into a subsequent motion. You have recovered that full range of motion because you've protected it by augmenting the tissues with tensile strength. Opposite direction. Please spread out your legs on this, or you're going to injure your knees. Bring them splayed. So now you're turning your instep downward from here. Now you may remember from the shin roll in the first volume that you need to have a 45-degree access to the ground for your knee, instead of this ridiculous two-dimensional biomotor function which will put undue stress and compromise the integrity of your joints. 45-degree angle, because the tissues are meant to work in a rotational value. Both directions. Now your little drunken stupor, walk back and forth so that you're working on developing the tissue strength in a range of motion. What I'm going to ask you to do next is going to take a bit of chutzpah. I need you to work on carefully rolling your toes underneath, because we're going to come up on top of them once we develop the strength of the arch. Dancers intuitively know if they need to put undue stress on the tissue of the foot, you need to develop the strength in a range of motion, because the foot is not one brick. It's highly articulated, just like the wrist and hand. Roll your toes forward, start transferring weight back and forth. Back and forth, increasing the amount of load that you're placing upon the ankle. You're going to notice just from the wrist exercises, this is also true for the alignment on the lower appendage, that you need to place all of the force along a particular line. Otherwise, so come back to the circles that we worked on initially. Now, place one up, switch, place the other. You can start by grabbing a wall just to balance yourself once your toes get acclimated to load bearing along with the development of an arch. If you have flat feet or a fallen arch, this is the best way to start to recover your ability to recruit force from the earth, from rooting, because of the development of an arch. Once you're comfortable with this, I'm going to ask you this. Once you're comfortable with this, up on top and start to walk. This is going to be excruciating at first, so take baby steps, hold on to the wall, and develop these incrementally. Back to the initial exercise. You're comfortable, right? We're masters at this, right? Wrong. Go work on it incrementally. Develop the strength in your tissues. And once you have, turn the video back on and come back. Remember position number 2 from the first volume? I'm at position number 1. That's good enough. Come back, and we're going to add this into this particular exercise that we worked on the beginning. We worked on this particular squat. This should be comfortable by now because you've been working on that exercise. The load bearing in this position should be simple. Turning that onto the insteps of the foot is going to be a particularly new challenge. Notice how the foot is load bearing. It's not rotating over and placing undue stress. I'm going to do it to you. Turn the toes down so that now you're resting and creating that artificial arch. From here, as you stand up, the alignment has to be correct, or you're going to be over-rotating, which should have been worked on in this initial exercise. So once again, place, create the arch, and then press up. Once you're comfortable with that, we're going to be doing repetitions of those exercises on your own, in the comfort of your own home, taking your time and working incrementally. One last exercise. Once we're in this position, what I want you to do is place your hands down on the inside. Now this is one last wrist strength exercise. Your knees should be on the outside of your elbows. Reason being, your hands are turned in at 45-degree angles, and we're going to work on the wrist strength and a balance. Because if you want stability, you start in mobility. If you want stability, you start in mobility. So the ability to balance is going to increase the strength of the tissues so that your fingers are now driving in and holding the earth with as much tensile strength as the feet do naturally. When we go into feature volumes, we're going to be taking those acrobatics and magnifying them, increasing their amplification. It's going to be challenging, so you need to start with these particular joint strength exercises. One of the other senior trainers at RMAX, Ben Brackbill, is going to help me with these next full body complex exercises because it's going to be difficult to narrate and both do them. I'll be ripping the mic off of my body if I try this. So Ben is going to take us through these exercises. I'm going to point out some of the positions. Now, we're coming back to position number 1. He's going to take his leg and slide through as he posts in a clean point so that he has his balance along 3 points. Notice that the leg is just resting along the side. There shouldn't be any strain here. We've already worked on the wrist strength. He's going to take his arm and reach. The plane here is along the length of his torso. He's stretching out. As he does so, you can see that he's going to open up the pelvis and lift. And when he comes back down, he's going to carefully bring this back together. He'll stretch out one more time. Now look at the plane. It comes straight along this line. This is where you're stretching. Okay. Make sure that you don't do these in isolation and just stretch. You'll end up pulling a muscle. Remember, if you work in isolation, you'll perform in isolation. If you work organically, you'll perform with a coordinated, recruited movement program. Next part of this exercise. Instead of the plane of along the torso, we're going to now take the hand back and stretch out the whole torso area. All of the muscles pushing from the pelvis and the solar plexus, recruited with the lunar plexus pulling outward, reaching this arm backward and back down. We'll do this one more time and reach and open up so that you're stretching out throughout the whole body, all of the joints coordinated together and back down. Remember, I can't emphasize this enough. If you stretch in isolation, that lends its performance to isolation. That's why you have to work in coordinated movement programs so that your movement is in a range of motion with the rest of the joint programming. Third variation on the exercise. Breathe on this one because you're going to be constricting the thoracic capacity. You're going to be closing off. As the muscle tissue is wrapped around into the spine, you're also working and opening up the pelvic girdle. And we mentioned this in the first tape and come back. I'm not going to talk the whole way through. The largest ligament in your body, the iliofemoral ligament, is going to be loading as you're wrenching in the opposite direction. You need to reach through between your planted foot and your planted hand so that the tissues come around and load the spine and back. the ability to load the spine and coordinate your joint tissues along with it is fundamental to your motoric programming. So reach underneath, exhale. Respiration will prohibit you, if you hold your breath, it'll prohibit you from your movement. The ability to generate that intra-abdominal and intra-lung pressure through compression is going to lend itself to the high degree of mobility. In just a moment, we're going to move on to a different segment and a different set, which is going to require the tensile strength that we worked on with our joint tissues. Position number 1, we've now brought into, now this doesn't have to be a wall, you can use a chair, you can use a friend or a partner, but since this is solo drills, I want you to count on the environment that you have at hand to train. So, using the wall, adopt position number 2 and bring your foot over onto your far thigh. This is going to take you being able to concentrate on the tensile strength of position number 1 on one leg. Now, if you're having trouble with this, first take the foot and place it right down in front. As you're working on this for a few weeks, it'll become easier and easier to just adopt this posture, carrying all of the load onto one joint. We're going to make this a little more challenging. We're going to take this and now place and press on the outside of the knee. And notice how it's starting to open up onto the pelvic girdle so that you're working and opening up this expansion here, like we worked on with that figure 8 at the beginning. Press down, release the tension, press and open up. Give your pelvis a push forward so that you see how he's bringing his lunar plexus forward as the knee goes down. Take your time on this so that you're not tearing tissues, but building strength. Next, as you're here, take your leg out directly, 90-degree angle to your other. Open up the pelvis. Now look at what Ben's doing. He's turning this backward at a 45-degree angle. Initially, this is going to be excruciating because of the rotational value on the tendons and ligaments. Turning it backwards. You won't be able to get this initially. Start with just upright and want to. Issue the will to go backwards. Eventually this will start going further and further and further backward, and I'm going to help him just a little. And you'll find that the tissues do relax. And we talked about this in volume 1, the stretch reflex. What's keeping your flexibility is not because your tissues have not been maladapted and torn and rended. What's keeping your flexibility from occurring is fear reactivity. Your discomfort with an unfamiliar motion. The tissues pull backwards and resist against it. As you work on the tensile strength, it's going to lend itself a kinesthetic confidence that'll give you back your natural flexibility. So start to allow this to drop backwards. In the next exercise, bring your leg all the way behind. Look, again, Ben's adopting the alignment that's necessary so that you're load bearing on the entire arch and ankle. Don't start leaning forward or you're going to put undue stress on joints and start to compromise the joint integrity. Keep the alignment proper, lifting along the spine so each joint's holding the particular weight transfer. Ben's going to do one thing. He's going to put his hand against the wall and he's going to lift his leg off the ground. What we're going to work on to eventually is transferring the weight from a balanced posture. What I want you to do at home is to start depending less upon support so that you're balancing upon the individual structure, load bearing at the ankles. Okay, this is just going to be incremental. What we'll go on to next is we'll see in the third tape how we can take the tensile strength that we've developed in the individual joint complexes, how we've recruited the joints so that we have an overall motoric program, and take the elementary biomechanics from volume 1 and start to compose complex motor sets.